What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now here behind me, we've got the 2024 Honda Civic Type-R FL5, and in today's episode I'm going to show you guys how to install some spoon lowering springs on the FL5 Type-R. Now these lowering springs only lower the car by about 20 millimeters, which is a very modest drop, and the most important thing is I want to retain the factory ride quality on this car. So without further ado, let's go ahead, get this car up in the air, pull the wheels and tires off, and we'll start disassembling the OEM suspension. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, FL5 is safely supported up in the air with some jack stands, and we're going to go ahead and knock out the rear suspension first, since this is the easiest part from what I've heard. So let's go ahead and knock this thing out. Alright, so what you want to do is you want to go ahead and take your 17 millimeter and remove this bolt away from the knuckle, and then you want to go ahead and take a 12 millimeter and undo this bolt right here, and that's for the end link right there. But before you go ahead and remove this, you want to go ahead and support this side with a floor jack, and then once you have this bolt removed and this bolt removed right here, then you'll safely lower the floor jack and this spring will come right out. So this spring's not under too much compression right now. We're definitely have to use the spring compressors up front, but the rear is not necessary. Okay, so hopefully this is easy, like they say, so let's go ahead and remove the driver's side rear spring. Alrighty guys, the rear driver's side spring is removed from the FL5 Civic. Now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and transfer the top rubber portion right here onto the spoon spring, and the same thing with the bottom rubber piece right here on the bottom of the new spoon spring. And then when we reinstall, you want to make sure and be careful with these rubber, I guess, the little tabs right there, to make sure that they go in the bottom right here on those two circles right there. I think one right there, and I believe one right there. So it's very important when you reseat the spring that this tab right here and this tab are seated correctly. Okay, let's go ahead and transfer the rubber pieces over and we'll start the reinstallation process. Alright, now that the rear driver's side spoon spring is installed on the FL5, let's go ahead and torque the spec. Now according to the Honda service manual, the sway bar bolt, that's rated at 30 foot-pounds, so we'll go ahead and torque it to 30 foot-pounds. And then the bolt that holds the knuckle onto a lower arm, that's 51 foot-pounds. So we'll go ahead and torque that to 51. So let's go ahead and torque those to spec. Okay, the rear passenger side spoon spring installed successfully. Now before we go ahead and take the final step, I need to show you a tactic of what I did. So over here in the cup of this lower arm, you got this little rubber, I guess, encasement with the two tabs. For whatever reason, when I tried to attach that rubber piece onto the spring and then slide it into this cup right here, these rubber tabs right here were not lining up and popping through correctly. Okay, so what I did is I went ahead and installed the rubber piece before the spoon spring went in. So I basically made sure that those two tabs on the bottom were lined up correctly. And then once the spoon spring was going in, I basically just had to twist this thing clockwise, getting it through the loop and then making sure the spring end was touching basically that tab that was on the rubber piece. So just a little tech tip when you're installing springs. You need to go ahead and definitely make sure that those two rubber tabs are pushing through correctly on this lower arm right here. Okay, the next step is a little tricky. I went ahead and did this on the driver's side rear. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and push up on this rubber boot. Then you want to go ahead where that rib's at, cut that bottom rib right there. So that's what spoon instructions tell you. So the best way to do this is you can go ahead and get a razor blade and just carefully cut while this suspension is in place. Because otherwise, I believe that there's some bolts on the bottom right here. You don't have to go inside the car, but I think in order to access those bolts, this whole fender liner has to come out, and that's just a pain in the butt. So, you know, you don't see this thing, and you know, just be careful when you make that cut with the razor. I mean, you can do a pretty good job. You gotta cut this thing anyways, whether it's in the car or out of the car. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this off camera because it's very hard to film this, because I basically need both of my hands to do this. All right, I'm gonna go ahead, put the camera down, make the cut, and I'll show you what the end result is. Okay, so I went ahead and torqued this bolt to spec, and the bolt right here for the end link, that's torqued to spec. And let me show you what's going on with the bump stop. So basically, this is a rubber boot, and you basically just push this upwards and get off these notches right here. All right, so it's a little tough to see, and I did the best I could, you know, using a razor blade. And that's the best thing to do in order to cut these bump stops, but you're just cutting the bottom rib off. And all this is just a piece of foam. Spoon Sports recommended cutting this thing, so I'm gonna go ahead and follow the directions, and that's basically the end result right there of cutting the bump stop. You can take your rubber boot and then go ahead and just push this thing down, and then just make sure that this rubber boot comes all the way down to this bottom lip right here. So let me go ahead and set the camera down, get this taken care of, and I'll show you. All right, so there it is. Rear shock absorber rubber boot is reseated in position. So just go ahead and make sure that this rubber boot is seated properly, because you don't want any dust and debris up there. Okay, let's go ahead and take care of the front suspension. All right, the front struts, this is going to be the worst part from what I've heard, so let me show you what I've learned in order to go ahead and remove these things. Now these three bolts right here on the top of the strut tower, these need to be removed, but that's going to be the last part. So we need to address the bottom part first and get that thing loose. Okay, so taking a look right here in the fender well, there's a few bolts we need to address. Now I believe this bolt right here, I've read that some people have removed, and they've had actually more maneuverability on this knuckle assembly. So I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can try to undo that bolt. And this bolt right here on the bottom of the strut, we're gonna go ahead and undo that bolt right there. In the main bolts, we need to go ahead and remove this one right here, and then this one right down here. It's a little tough to see. And we'll also need to remove the electrical connector for the electronic damper control. And I think we need to go ahead and remove this 12mm for the brake line. I read about that as well. Now some people have commented to go ahead and undo the axle nut. I'm gonna try my best not to undo this thing, because as you can see, that thing is bent with that tab right there. I mean, this thing is torqued to spec, so I'm gonna see if I can go ahead and get away with not undoing the axle nut. Okay, let me go ahead and start unbolting these bolts and see if I can actually dislodge the bottom of the strut from this knuckle assembly right here. So what you need to do is make sure all these nuts and bolts are removed, and then basically push down on this assembly and dislodge this bottom strut assembly right here. All right, let's go ahead and take care of this. All right guys, finally got the OEM driver's side spring removed and the spoon spring in position. Now I didn't film this because I was basically in a rhythm right here. My neighbor had come over and help me, but this was really a pain in the butt compared to the rear side. So let me explain to you what occurred here. So essentially what has to happen is you got this strut tube right here, and the strut tube is tucked into this knuckle assembly. But basically once this bolt comes out and this bolt comes out, the theory is this knuckle should go straight down and the strut should come right out. However, that's not the case. I mean, I fought with this thing and fought with this thing. So you definitely need pry bars for this operation. So once you got pry bars, you're gonna be basically going from the top of this knuckle assembly and then this part right here where basically the screws go through, and you're gonna be basically pushing up. But I mean, I was like starting down here, prying just like that. And then once I got past this level, I started at the top right here and went to there. But I mean, it is not fun at all. And I'm glad that I had a 36mm impact socket for the axle. So I went ahead and took the axle nut off to relieve pressure on the axle because I don't want to break the seal. But I mean, basically you got to hang this assembly really low, just an FYI. But I need to go ahead and torque everything to spec, but everything's in place. And you know, you got the rubber nubs on the bottom of the shock right here in position. I went ahead and used the spring compressors on the OEM and the spoon spring. So we got everything installed, but I mean, it's almost like a two-man operation doing this, because literally I had to push down on this rotor assembly, and then to get the thing in and pull the thing out, it is not fun, let me tell you. And I also went ahead and undid this linkage right here, and there's another bolt right here that connects to the frame right there. So I went ahead and got this linkage undone right there. And then obviously you got this linkage undone as well. And the electrical connector itself, that's not fun. There's a little safety switch. So you need to pull this white tab backwards and then get a screwdriver in there and pop this out and then pull it out. So I had to figure that connector out, didn't want to damage that. And then we need to go ahead and put the bracket on for the electronic damper control and the brake line on the back side, because this needs to be undone in order to get access to the bottom 17mm bolt right there for the knuckle assembly. Oh, and I also got my second body damage on the FL5 thanks to the dead blow hammer, but rather hit this with a dead blow hammer than the sledgehammer and regular hammer. Basically what I was doing is I was trying to hit that knuckle going from the top right here, and basically I just hit that fender, boom, just like that. So there's a very slight dent. It sucks, but it is what it is. Learn by mistakes. Don't use a dead blow, you know, at this level right here, and use pry bars down there. Could have been worse, so I'm gonna go ahead and find a paintless dent repair guy. I'm pretty sure he'll be able to just pull the fender liner out and pop it out, but sucks, but it is what it is. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and torque everything to spec, and then let's go ahead and hit the other side. Hopefully it's not as painful as this side. This was not fun. All right, I'm going to show you guys what tools it takes in order to put lowering springs on FL5 Type-R Civic. First things first, 1/2-inch impact gun. This is very important and very helpful. You got some miscellaneous screwdrivers, flathead and Phillips, 1/2-inch breaker bar, 1/2-inch torque wrench, 3/8 torque wrench, and we got some various sizes of impact sockets, 14, 17, 19, and 22 millimeter. Also an extension. And we got some various 3/8 sockets and extensions, including a swivel, a 12 millimeter and a 14 millimeter, 3/8 ratchet, 12 millimeter ratcheting wrench, 17 millimeter ratcheting wrench, 19 millimeter offset wrench, 3/8 electric wrench if you have one, hammer, rubber mallet, dead blow hammer, various pry bars, long 1/2-inch extension, razor blades, and as far as the rental tools are concerned, I've got spring compressors and a 36 millimeter axle socket. I do have this in my personal toolbox, but my friend was actually borrowing it. So fortunately, O'Reilly Auto Parts lends out axle sockets in various sizes. Thank God for that. And last but not least, torque specs for the front and rear suspension for the FL5 Type-R. And that wraps up all the tools I used in order to put lowering springs on the FL5 Type-R. Alrighty guys, finally got the spoon springs installed on the Honda Civic Type-R FL5, and I must say that the front end is the worst part. Rear end is very simple, but that front end, separating the knuckle assembly from the front strut, it's the worst part. But if you can make it through it, you're gonna be okay. Anyhow, I think all that trouble is worth it. I mean, just look at how this thing is sitting right now. It's just the right amount of wheel gap. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's just right. So what do you think of the new fitment on the Honda Civic Type-R FL5 here? Anyhow, in the next video, we're going to do a more in-depth review of the spoon springs on the FL5 Type-R, ranging from alignment specs, driver impressions, and I hope you guys can stay tuned for that. Anyhow, if you found this video helpful or entertaining, please give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching and have a fantastic day.